Hello, welcome to this CGTN live broadcast. I'm Martin Lowe. We're on a boat, as you can see, and we're in the Andaman Sea off the island of Phuket in Thailand, and this is where we're going. Straight ahead of us, hopefully, you can just make out this lifting crane. And this lifting crane was brought here from Singapore, and it's been used to raise from the seabed the wreck of the Thai pleasure boat Phoenix. The Phoenix sank here in a fierce storm in July while it was on a day trip packed with holidaymakers, almost all of them from China. 101 people were on board the boat. It capsized and it sank. 47 people, almost half of those on board, died. All of them were Chinese holidaymakers, children, mums and dads, school friends, family members. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. It was the worst marine tragedy involving tourists in Thailand in memory. Now, for the last 4 months, there has been an ongoing operation to try to raise the Phoenix from the seabed. It proved extraordinarily difficult, but yesterday was the breakthrough. Yesterday it was successful, and we witnessed and we brought you pictures, if you were able to join us yesterday, of the Phoenix being attached to this huge crane that we're traveling to now and being lifted up from the seabed. Now, the reason that it was so vital to raise the boat from the seabed was because there is a police investigation. Clearly 47 people died, and there are many, many questions that need answering, particularly, of course, for the families and the relatives of those people from China who died. Thailand has made a public promise that they will carry out the fullest, perhaps the most detailed and in-depth police investigation into any tourist accident, tragedy that's ever taken place here. But that assurance has been given. And what was thought to be essential right from the outset was to raise the Phoenix boat so that it could be taken ashore and examined by forensic experts in great detail to see what, if any, part the construction and operation of the boat itself played in the tragedy. What we're hoping to see today is the Phoenix being transported from the crane that raised it from the bottom of the sea and placed on a flatbed barge. Once the Phoenix is on the barge, and we'll know when we get there whether that's already happened or whether it's still just about to happen. But as soon as they're able to get the Phoenix boat onto the barge, it will then be sailed at a fairly slow speed, the few 3 or 4 kilometers back to the main island of Phuket, and it'll be taken to a shipyard and placed in a dock. All of the remaining water that perhaps might still be in the boat or any debris from the seabed, all of that will be cleaned out, and then the police will begin their investigation. How far are we now? We're not exactly sure how close we'll be able to get. There is an exclusion zone. We're on an official Thai Marine Police boat, so we obviously will be able to get as close as it's safe to do. It's not our safety that they're concerned about so much as the people who are actually taking part in the recovery operation. The crane ship, which you can see, is able to lift a weight of up to 1,000 tons, but clearly lifting something from below it could possibly capsize the crane ship itself. So the way that they deal with that is that they put anchors out all around the crane ship. There are 8 anchors on long, long chains securing the crane ship to the seabed to hold it stable while it raised up the Phoenix from the deep. And the concern is that if any ships, including ours, go too close, there is always an outside possibility that we might collide with one of those anchor chains, dislodge it, and then in turn make the people on board the crane ship at risk of perhaps capsizing or at least being pulled out of position. So we will be restricted on just how close we can get, but hopefully we will be able to see what's going on. This operation has proved incredibly difficult. The wreck of the boat was lying in 45 meters of seawater. Obviously that's 150, 160 odd feet. That's a very deep depth, and it's very difficult for divers to operate at that depth. Clearly, divers had to go down right from the beginning. Obviously, after the boat first sank, the initial day or two, there was a mad scramble, of course. Some survivors had been pulled from the water, but they wanted to find out if there were any more. And as soon as the Phoenix boat was found, divers were sent down, just in the 1,000,000 to 1 chance that there might have been an air pocket, or there might still be some people who were still alive. That sadly proved not to be the case. But so after it was known beyond doubt that there was no chance of any more survivors, then clearly the next stage of the operation was the recovery of the bodies. 47 people, as we've said, were drowned. Now, a large number of them were trapped inside the cabin of the boat. Their bodies were retrieved. Other bodies were found in the water, fairly close to this point where the boat sank. Some more had been carried many, many kilometers away by currents, and they were discovered over the days that followed the disaster. So clearly that was the main emphasis. Number one, of course, looking for survivors. Number two, retrieving, sadly, the bodies of those who died. But as soon as that process had been completed, and a short period of time, a respectful pause had been given to allow funeral arrangements and the repatriation to China of a number of the bodies, then the focus shifted to this recovery operation of the boat itself. Initially, a team of Thai divers worked on this project, weather permitting, and the weather was bad. It was the monsoon season when the boat sank, and for the months that followed. And so although it seems a fairly calm day today, there have been a lot of rough days out here with big seas and heavy winds. But as soon as it was practical, the Thai divers started the operation to swim down to the wreck, and they tried repeatedly to attach flotation tanks and steel drums to the Phoenix hull, and they were then pumped with air, and they had a number of attempts to float the boat to the surface. That proved incredibly difficult. That proved technically much harder than they expected, and a number of their attempts were unsuccessful. They worked so hard, they tried so hard. In fact, one of the Thai divers lost his life in that operation. A Thai man called Nipat Kladnak. He by a perverse coincidence, was actually the Thai diver who first found the wreck of the Phoenix after it sank. After it sank, there was a lot of activity out here to try to find where the boat was. It was Nipat himself who found the boat. He was an experienced diver in this region. I met him during that recovery operation. He was very proud of the role he played. He said he was very proud to be able to help people with his experience, and after the boat was found, he was instrumental in the ongoing operation to look for survivors, to retrieve the bodies, to retrieve lost property and possessions from the seabed, and then that operation to try to raise the boat. But unfortunately, it was during that operation, he'd been diving, he'd come back to the surface, he was standing on the stern of one of the recovery boats, but again, it wasn't a day like this that was relatively calm. It was a day of rough seas. Nobody knows 100% what happened, but it seems he lost his balance and he fell, and it's thought he struck his head and went into the water. He was seen and he was recovered, and efforts were made to resuscitate him, but they weren't successful. He was taken to the shore to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. So he became the 48th victim of this awful tragedy. Nevertheless, after a pause, the Thai salvage team continued in their efforts. They carried on. They tried to dedicate the operation to Nipat's memory. Unfortunately, it simply proved too great a task for the equipment that they had at their disposal. And just over a week or so ago, they actually had to call off their recovery operation, and then a new salvage team brought in with much it's a much more costly operation. This is a specialist recovery crane that has sailed here from Singapore. But after a few short days, this massive crane that we can now see achieved the job that the divers unfortunately had not been able to achieve. And they raised the boat, which we can see now. So underneath the metal chains hanging down from the arm of the crane, if you look straight down, the sun's not helping because there's a lot of glare, but you can make out, I'm sure, the off-white, the dirty white, sort of creamy colour, which is the Phoenix boat now on the surface. And that boat was pristine white colour when it was sailing here, when those people got on board for their day trip on July the 5th. But what you can see now is the result of being on the seabed for some 4 months. That's the ravages of the tide and the sand and the debris on the seabed. So it has been brought up in a very sorry looking state. But clearly what is important is that is the single most important piece of evidence that the police will be able to examine when they continue their investigation, which of course started right at the outset. But this is a vital piece of evidence which they intend to scour from stem to stern and from top to bottom. And they will be trying to find out as much as they can about whether there was anything wrong with the boat, whether it was the boat itself which played a major part in its sinking, or whether it was simply not the boat, but it was the conditions or possibly even the actions of the crew. All of those things are going to be looked at, but clearly getting the boat up is a massive breakthrough in this ongoing Thai police investigation. So we're getting a slightly better view now. It isn't too clear because of the sun and the glare, but I think clearly the Phoenix is still suspended from the chains, from the crane. And what they're hoping to do today is to lift it up out of the water and swing it just a few degrees away from us and place it on a barge. If you can make it out, the crane ship is red colour in the foreground, and then behind it is, I think, a black coloured flat barge. And the intention is to place the Phoenix boat on that black barge, and then the barge will be towed back to Phuket Island, and the Phoenix will be taken to a shipyard so that in their own time and without any consideration of bad weather or rough seas, the investigators can pore over that boat and they can study in detail what may or may not have happened. We can see a little bit of movement. We can see the chains going up and down. Whether they're actually going to be able to raise it now, we don't know. We hope so. There's quite a lot of activity on our boat. There are police officers, there are immigration officials, there are people here from the Chinese authorities. They of course have a vested interest in what's happening today, and they're here to demonstrate that they're taking this incredibly seriously, and they're fulfilling their promises to ensure a very thorough investigation indeed. Let's just watch what's happening for a few minutes. So among the reasons that this is being seen as so important is that questions have already been raised about the design of the boat. Statements were made at the time by police officers and by marine officials There is a suggestion that this boat was built in Thailand at a shipyard that didn't have the necessary licenses and registrations to build a boat. It was a very fine-looking boat when it was afloat. It was a very attractive boat. It's clear to see why it attracted people to get on board it, but there are now questions being raised about the seaworthiness of the vessel itself. And there's also a suggestion that it was fitted with the wrong type of engine. It's been stated repeatedly that the boat was fitted with a lorry, a truck engine, which had been initially designed for use on land and was never intended to be installed in a boat. And part of the problem with that is that the configuration of the exhaust pipes was not designed for a boat, and they were quite low down above the waterline. And what we're looking at today is a fairly flat sea, but on the day that this boat sank, it was a fierce monsoonal storm. And we're told, and I was down here myself a few short hours later, the seas out here were 4 to 5 meters high. The waves were 4 to 5 meters high. And this boat was completely unable to cope with the conditions. But as the water rose up and down, and as the Phoenix rolled in those rough seas, one theory is that those ill-designed exhaust pipes went under the water and became swamped, which then in turn caused the engine to stop. And obviously that left the Phoenix powerless in the water and unable to make any progress against the big waves and the storm that it was trying to overcome. And it was after the engine stopped that the Phoenix was basically at the mercy of the sea, and our understanding is that it was simply swamped by those waves. Initially it capsized, and then quite quickly afterwards it sunk stern first straight to the bottom of the sea, leaving many people trapped inside. All the evidence is that everybody on board was wearing life jackets, and certainly those on the upper decks, on the outside of the boat, who were thrown into the sea, they mostly survived. They were rescued quite quickly. A lot of boats came out here despite the appalling conditions on that day. A lot of boats came out to give help, and many people were plucked from the sea and their lives were saved. But unfortunately the people, and of course this included a lot of mothers and young children, people who were sheltering inside the cabin of the boat, albeit wearing life jackets, were simply swept up by the incoming water, and the buoyancy of their life jackets forced them against the ceiling of the cabin. And it was in fact the life jackets as much as anything which prevented them swimming down to the doors and the exits, and as the boat went down they were trapped in that position, and tragically they drowned. So these are all lessons that people intend to learn. There may be new rules in future about not putting on life jackets until you actually get outside of a boat. Anyway, all of that is for the future, but clearly what we're looking at now is an integral part of what's taking place. How close can we go? Can we get a good view of the Phoenix? It's still in the water, isn't it? It looks as though it's still in the water. It's not been moved onto the barge yet. But there are tugs in place, so clearly it's anticipated that this operation to move the Phoenix ashore back to dry land will be getting underway today. That clearly is the intention. And we don't actually know 100% whether it's necessary to raise the Phoenix on top of the black barge, or whether it can simply be lashed to the side of it, more or less in the position it is now. What we do know is that it's going to be a very slow trip back to shore. They think it might take 4 or 5 hours. They're going to be taking it very slowly. What they don't want to do, obviously, is get involved in any mishaps. They don't want the boat to come adrift. They certainly don't want the boat to slip below the waves again, because it's been an enormous job to bring it up. So they're making sure everything is completely secure, and the intention is to very slowly and very gently bring the boat back from here to the main island of Phuket itself. and then it will be taken to a shipyard and made available for investigators from a number of organizations. Clearly the Chinese authorities will want to be heavily involved in that investigation. The Thai police will be overseeing it. But we do know that a German firm of engineers has been contracted to come in as an independent third party and to give an independent view on anything that's found and its significance. So another example really of the Thai authorities who are doing everything they can to make this investigation as open and as transparent as possible. All sorts of facts have come to light. There are concerns over who actually owned the boat. Was it owned by Thai people? Was it owned by Chinese people? Was it operating legally? Was it operating illegally? We talked already about was the boat seaworthy? The competence of the crew is something that's being examined. We do know that the skipper of the boat and all of the crew, who are all Thais, they all managed to get off and they all survived. And obviously it was Chinese passengers who drowned. So whether their actions were reasonable on that day will be examined. We talked about the life jackets, which in a number of cases seem to contribute to the high number of deaths. Were they the right kind of life jackets? Will it be necessary to issue an order that different types of life jackets are made available, or perhaps there'll be a new process, a new standard operating procedure where people aren't allowed to put life jackets on until they step outside of the cabin of a boat? There's a lot to be learned here. And it's not just lessons for the future. The Thai authorities have already moved to take action in the aftermath of this terrible, terrible tragedy. Quite quickly, Thai authorities ordered an inspection of all of the boats based in Phuket that were used for tourist trips and for day trips. And that was a big fleet. That's 400 boats. They were all examined, and alarmingly, half of them were found to not fully meet the required safety standards, and remedial work was ordered. 30 boats were found to be unsafe and were actually ordered out of the water until they had been adapted or modified, or those safety concerns were addressed. They're also looking at improving their paperwork, their registration, if you like. When the Phoenix was lost, at one stage, an extra 5 people were presumed dead because they were thought to have been on board, and there was no way of finding them. And it subsequently came to light that in fact they had not boarded the boat. They'd bought tickets, but they hadn't actually got on the boat. So there are going to be new systems put in place. All boats are going to have to register with the authorities their departure and their return times, and a full list of the number of passengers on board and the routes that they intend to take. A little bit like an aeroplane's flight plan that's logged by a commercial airliner. So a number of steps are going to be taken to try to make the carrying of tourists on day trips on speedboats to different islands. They want to make this whole process a lot more regulated and a lot more official, and in the hope that they'll prevent anything similar to this happening again. Okay, so looking back at the Phoenix, we can now see that the boat has been disconnected from the crane. So clearly the intention is to take it to shore, not aboard, not on top of the black barge, but in the position it's in now, tied alongside, basically floating in its own right. Presumably any holes or breakages have been temporarily fixed to allow the boat to be brought back ashore. And the tugboat that we can see at the front is clearly going to tow both the barge and the Phoenix hull back to shore. And that's a process which appears to be beginning even now as we're actually watching it. Nothing's going to happen too quickly. The police, right at the outset, appealed to the salvage teams to do whatever they could to preserve any evidence that remains aboard the Phoenix. So great efforts have been made. to take every step slowly and carefully to make sure that no further damage is made to the boat during the recovery process. And that was a major factor also, one of the major factors as to why the recovery took so long. The depth of the boat, 45 meters, that's a very, very deep. Not many divers can operate at that depth, and those that can't stay down for very long. So that was the number one problem, the depth of the boat. We had a lot of bad weather. There's a lot of black clouds coming in today. We don't expect a storm today, but I think rain is going to happen anytime soon. But the third consideration really was that desire to preserve any evidence that could be found aboard the Phoenix. So that meant that the recovery operation was very slow and measured, and so this final part, this is the final lap, and clearly it's a huge sigh of relief for the salvage teams. We talked about the initial 3-month salvage attempt by a Thai company, which sadly simply had to be abandoned because they just didn't have the capability to get the boat to the surface. Now we've got a much bigger, more expensive operation. They've been successful, but even so, this took longer than they thought, even with this great big crane ship here, which of course is designed specifically for this type of work. They thought they would be able to do it almost immediately after their arrival. That didn't prove to be the case. They encountered bad weather, not just on the surface, but below the water here. There are some very strong currents which do interfere with the work of the divers. Of course, they had to attach the crane, the chains and the ropes to the crane. So this has been a difficult operation at every stage, much more difficult than people had initially expected. But now the breakthrough has been made. There was huge relief yesterday when the boat was brought to the surface, and clearly now this is the final stage, towing the boat to the shore at Phuket, where it can be taken along a canal which adjoins the sea and into a shipyard, and there it can be secured, and it can be examined in great detail without any concerns about weather or tide or anything else. And it is there that the police hope that they will get the information they need, and as soon as possible their findings, I'm sure, will be made public, because clearly there are so many people who have a deep-rooted interest in finding out exactly what happened here. The Thai authorities feel they have a duty to find out what happened. The Thai government wants to ensure that tourist safety in the future is improved and guaranteed. And of course, most importantly, the families and the relatives back in China of those who perished here will want to know if there was anyone at fault, or if it was simply one of those things, a storm, an act of God, if you will. So a lot of people are watching this process with great attention. Yeah, and okay, we've moved around. So nothing to see instantly, but we've been able, hopefully, to show you that the operation is now in its final stage. The boat has been brought to the surface. It has now been connected to a barge, and it is being towed back to the mainland for the next stage of this investigation to continue. That's probably all we can usefully show you for now. Our boat is returning to the shore, and we hope you found some of this instructive and helped you understand a little bit more some of the things that happened on that day. So we're going to wind up now. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again on CGTN. Thank you for your time, but for now, goodbye from Phuket.